The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint rustle of unseen creatures. Rose shoved her door open with a huff, stepping out of the truck and into the eerie stillness of the dirt road. Her heels crunched on the gravel as she straightened, her sharp gaze sweeping the surrounding forest. A shiver ran down her spine, though she'd never admit it, not to Caleb, and certainly not to herself. "I hate the woods," she muttered, brushing an imaginary speck of dirt off her coat. "Yeah, no kidding," Caleb replied from the driver's seat, still fiddling with the ignition. "Weird noises, bugs, and now a dead truck. It's paradise." Rose shot him a glare, her dark eyes glinting in the dim light. "Spare me the commentary. I'll figure out what's going on." As Caleb muttered curses at the unresponsive engine, Rose wandered a few steps away from the truck. The faint hum of magic in the air prickled at the edge of her awareness, drawing her attention to the tall, ancient trees surrounding them. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed faint etchings on one of the trunks, runes carved with precision and glowing faintly in the darkness. "Interesting," she murmured, stepping closer. Her fingers brushed the rough bark, tracing the intricate symbols. They weren't immediately recognizable, but their craftsmanship was undeniable. Elegant and deliberate, designed to blend seamlessly with the natural world. "What is it?" Caleb called, glancing over his shoulder. Rose didn't answer immediately, her gaze shifting upward. She spotted a glint of metal nestled high in the branches, a tiny, skillfully concealed security camera. Her smirk returned, sharp and knowing. "Well, well," she said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Someone's been busy." Caleb got out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. "What are you talking about?" Rose gestured toward the runes and the hidden camera. "This isn't just a random dirt road. Someone's protecting this place." "Protecting it?" Caleb frowned, following her gaze. "Or hiding it?" "Does it matter?" Rose replied, turning back toward the road. "Either way, I intend to find out." They walked in silence, the night pressing in around them. The road surface was well worn, and Caleb's sharp eye for detail didn't miss the subtle signs of frequent use. "For a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, this gets a lot of traffic," he observed, his voice low. "Look at the tire tracks, different sizes, and they're fresh." Rose nodded, though her focus was ahead. Her sharp gaze caught the faint glow of lights in the distance, flickering like a beacon in the darkness. "There," she said, her voice taut with purpose. "Something's up ahead." Caleb hesitated. "Are you sure we should—" "Yes," Rose interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "Keep moving." As they advanced, the forest seemed to grow quieter, the usual hum of nocturnal life fading into an unsettling stillness. The glow of the lights grew stronger, resolving into a cluster of faintly illuminated structures partially obscured by the trees. Rose stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Caleb halted beside her, his eyes narrowing as he followed her gaze. The buildings were faintly modern but blended seamlessly with the forest, their edges softened by vines and moss. The faint hum of magic radiated from the area, subtle but unmistakable. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to keep this place hidden," Rose said quietly, her voice edged with intrigue. Caleb tilted his head, his brows furrowing. "But why? And who?" Rose smirked, the sharp gleam in her eyes returning. "Only one way to find out." The forest had gone silent. Not just quiet, but a suffocating, unnatural silence that pressed in on Rose and Caleb like an unseen hand. The faint glow of the distant lights flickered between the trees, tantalizingly close. But neither of them moved. Caleb's instincts screamed at him to turn back, every fibre of his being warning that they were somewhere they shouldn't be. "I don't like this," he said, his voice low. "Something's off." "Oh, grow a spine," Rose shot back, her tone dismissive, but her sharp eyes betrayed her unease. She glanced around the darkened woods, her fingers brushing the bracelet on her wrist. "It's just some overgrown garden. What's the worst that could—" A deep, resonant howl tore through the air, cutting her off mid-sentence. It wasn't just loud, it was primal, vibrating through the ground and rattling their very bones. The sound was raw power, a declaration of dominance that left no room for interpretation. Caleb froze, his wide eyes scanning the shadows. That's not just a wolf. No kidding, Rose muttered, her sarcasm faltering as she gripped the lapels of her coat. For the first time in a long while, her confidence wavered. That sounded big. The underbrush ahead rustled, and a massive shape materialized from the shadows. Alpha, his fur dark as midnight, stepped into the faint moonlight. His golden eyes glowed, locking onto Rose and Caleb with an unsettling intelligence. "Oh, hell no," Caleb whispered, taking a step back. "We're leaving. Now." Rose, ever the contrarian, tilted her head, studying the massive wolf. "It's just a dog," she said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Alpha's lips curled back in what could only be described as a grin, revealing rows of gleaming teeth. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his massive paws making no sound on the forest floor. His gaze never wavered from Rose, as if daring her to keep talking. "See," Rose said, forcing a smirk. "Friendly." Caleb grabbed her arm, his voice a low hiss. "Friendly? That thing is the size of a horse, Rose. We are not sticking around to find out how many bones it can break in one bite." Before Rose could retort, another howl echoed through the trees, this one lighter but no less haunting. Omega, the half-dire wolf, emerged from the brush to Alpha's right. Sleek and muscular, her silver-grey fur shimmered in the dim light, and her sharp eyes flicked between the intruders. "Two of them," Caleb whispered, his voice climbing an octave. "This is bad. This is so bad." "Relax," Rose said, though she was inching back. "They're just curious." Alpha's head tilted slightly, his golden eyes narrowing. Then, with deliberate slowness, he lowered his massive body into a crouch, his tail swishing behind him. The motion was unmistakable, a predator preparing to pounce. Caleb let out a strangled noise that could barely be called a word. "Nope, nope, we're done. I'm out." Rose opened her mouth, probably to issue another sarcastic comment, but before she could, Alpha lunged, not at them, but into the brush beside them, his massive form disappearing in an instant. Both of them jumped back, Rose letting out a very uncharacteristic yelp. "What's he doing?" Caleb asked, his voice cracking. He spun around, trying to track Alpha's movements in the shadows. "Where did he go?" Rose pressed a hand to her chest, trying to regain her composure. "He's just messing with us. Wolves do that, right? They play." From somewhere behind them, a deep growl rumbled far too close for comfort. "Not the kind of play I'm interested in," Caleb snapped. "We're leaving. Right now." Just as they turned to retreat, a third howl pierced the night, this one higher and lighter than Alpha or Omega's. It was Beta, her sleek grey form darting between the trees, cutting off their path back to the truck. "Oh, come on," Caleb groaned, throwing his hands in the air. "Is this a family reunion?" The trio of wolves circled them now, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. Alpha's deep growl was punctuated by Omega's soft snarls, while Beta moved with a playful, almost taunting swiftness. And then it happened. Alpha threw his head back and let loose a howl so powerful, so raw, it seemed to shake the very trees. Omega and Beta joined in, their voices harmonizing into a haunting, otherworldly melody. The sound was so overwhelming that both Rose and Caleb instinctively dropped into crouches, their hands covering their ears. "Fine!" Rose shouted over the howling, her voice tinged with both anger and panic. "We're leaving! You win!" The wolves didn't stop howling as Rose and Caleb scrambled back toward the truck. Caleb grabbed Rose's arm, half dragging her as she muttered a string of curses under her breath. "This is why I hate the woods," she snapped as they reached the vehicle, the wolves still watching from the shadows, their glowing eyes tracking their every move. Caleb threw himself into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind him. "You're the one who wanted to come out here." Rose climbed in after him, slamming her door shut with equal force. "Don't you dare say I told you so." The engine sputtered to life, finally, and Caleb didn't waste a second, reversing down the dirt road at breakneck speed. The wolves watched from the tree line, their glowing eyes the last thing visible as the truck disappeared into the night. Once they were back on the main road, the adrenaline started to ebb. Caleb's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, while Rose stared out the window, her expression a mix of irritation and lingering unease. "Well," Caleb said, his voice still shaking. "That was terrifying." Rose's smirk returned, though it lacked its usual edge. "I've had worse." Caleb glanced at her, incredulous. "Worse than a pack of wolves the size of trucks?" Rose didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the glowing bracelet on her wrist. "Drive faster, Caleb." The SUV roared down the road, its engine protesting as Caleb pushed it harder than it had ever been pushed before. His grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled, his jaw set in a tense line. Beside him, Rose leaned back in her seat, her dark eyes fixed on the road ahead, her usual air of composure restored, at least outwardly. "You didn't have to floor it," Rose said dryly, her tone laced with sarcasm. "We're not being chased." Caleb shot her a sharp glare, his voice cracking with frustration. "Not being chased? Those weren't regular wolves, Rose. One of them was the size of a truck. A truck, Rose. And it was grinning at us." Rose waved a hand dismissively. "Wolves don't grin." "Then what the hell was that thing doing?" Caleb snapped, his voice rising. "Because it sure wasn't looking for belly rubs." By the time they pulled into the driveway of the safe house, Caleb's nerves were still frayed. He killed the engine with a jerky twist of the key and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as if it might ground him. Rose opened her door with her usual grace, stepping out and smoothing her coat. "Honestly, Caleb, you're overreacting." "Overreacting," Caleb repeated, his voice cracking as he scrambled out of the SUV. "Rose, those wolves weren't normal. They weren't even supernatural. They were something else entirely." Rose smirked, tilting her head at him. "Oh, come on. They were just big." Caleb threw his hands in the air. "Big! Rose, one of them howled, and I swear I felt my soul leave my body." The front door of the safe house opened, and Evelyn stepped out, her brows furrowing as she took in the scene. Argoz, in her human form, peeked over Evelyn's shoulder, her expression curious. "What's going on?" Evelyn asked, her sharp eyes scanning Caleb and Rose. "We went for a drive," Rose said smoothly, her smirk widening. "Caleb got spooked by a few wildlife sightings." Caleb's jaw dropped and he pointed an accusing finger at her. "Don't you dare downplay this. They weren't just wolves. They were monsters." The group gathered in the living room, where Caleb continued to pace, his agitation infectious. Rose leaned against the armrest of a chair, watching him with mild amusement, while Evelyn and Argoz listened intently. "So let me get this straight," Evelyn said, folding her arms. "You two went for a drive and you ran into wolves?" "Not just wolves," Caleb said, his voice firm. "The wolves. There were 3 of them, and the big one, Alpha, or whatever you want to call it, was playing with us, like a cat with a mouse." Argoz tilted her head, her brow furrowing. "Alpha? That sounds familiar." Evelyn frowned, her gaze sharpening. "You're sure they were wolves?" "Oh, I'm sure," Caleb said, flopping into a chair. "I'll never forget those eyes. They were too smart, too calculating." "And they didn't attack you?" Evelyn pressed. "Didn't need to," Caleb muttered. "One look, and we knew we didn't belong there." Rose finally straightened, brushing imaginary dust off her coat. "It was their territory, plain and simple, and they let us know it. Loudly." Evelyn turned to Rose, her expression skeptical. "And you thought it was a good idea to wander into their territory?" Rose's smirk returned, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I was curious. It's not every day you see such impressive security measures. Security measures? Evelyn asked, raising a brow. Rose nodded, her tone turning serious. The area was warded, heavily. Runes on the trees, cameras hidden in the branches. Someone's protecting that place, and those wolves are part of it. Evelyn exchanged a glance with Argoz, who shifted uneasily. It sounds like guardianship magic, Evelyn said slowly. Like what the Fae use to protect sacred sites. Argoz paled slightly. Caleb, you said one of them was called Alpha. That name means something back home. Caleb threw his hands up again. Great. Fantastic. Ancient Fae wolves. That makes it so much better. Rose chuckled softly. Relax, Caleb. They didn't hurt us. Not yet, Caleb shot back. But I guarantee you, if we'd stuck around 5 more minutes, we'd be wolf chow. Argoz crossed her arms, frowning. If they're guarding something, maybe we should find out what. Caleb stared at her, incredulous. Find out what? Did you not hear what I just said? They were the size of trucks, Argoz. Evelyn placed a calming hand on Caleb's shoulder, her voice measured. We'll need more information before we do anything. If those wolves are Fae guardians, they're bound to something important. But we need to be sure before we get involved. Rose nodded, her smirk fading. Agreed. And next time, Caleb, I'll let you pick the adventure. Caleb groaned, leaning back in his chair. No more adventures, ever. Argoz leaned closer to Evelyn, her voice quiet but insistent. If those wolves are what I think they are, this might be bigger than we realized. Rose's sharp ears caught the comment, and she raised a brow. Bigger how? Argoz hesitated, then looked up, her expression serious. They might be tied to the old Fae courts, the ones who ruled before my time. Rose tilted her head, intrigued. Well, well, looks like we're not done yet. The safe house was quiet except for the faint hum of the appliances and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Argoz paced the length of the living room, her movements deliberate, her sharp mind piecing together fragments of a plan. Caleb, still jittery from their encounter in the woods, sat at the edge of the couch nursing a glass of water. Rose lounged in a chair, her legs crossed, her expression cool and distant, but her eyes betrayed her curiosity as she watched Argoz. Finally, Argoz stopped and turned to face them. All right, she said, her tone crisp and commanding. I need to know everything you saw out there, every detail down to the last twig. Caleb frowned, setting his glass down. You're not serious? You're actually thinking about going back there? Not thinking, Argoz replied, her voice sharp. Planning. There's a difference. Caleb threw his hands up in exasperation. Fine. You want details? Here's what I remember. Giant wolves. One the size of a truck, by the way. Runes carved into the trees and a bunch of cameras hidden in the branches. Oh, and the road had more traffic than I've ever seen for a place in the middle of nowhere. Argoz nodded, her sharp eyes narrowing in thought. Good. Anything else? Smells? Sounds? Caleb hesitated, then rubbed the back of his neck. The air felt heavy, like there was magic everywhere, but it wasn't just floating around, it was focused, contained. Rose chimed in, her voice lazy but precise. And the wolves weren't just wandering, they were patrolling, coordinated. They knew we were there the second we stepped out of the truck. Argoz tapped a finger against her lips, her mind working furiously. Coordinated wolves, runes, hidden cameras. That means layered security, magical and mundane. And impossible to sneak past, Caleb added pointedly. Let's not forget that part. Rose leaned forward slightly, her smirk returning. The wolves are smart, especially the big one, Alpha. He didn't just intimidate us, he played with us. He wanted us to know we were out of our depth. That howl of his, it wasn't just a warning, it was a message. Argoz raised an eyebrow. And the message was? Run while you still can, Rose said, her voice laced with amusement. Great, Caleb muttered. So, You're planning to walk straight into the jaws of something that told us to leave. Argoz crossed her arms, her gaze steady. I'm not planning to walk into their jaws. I'm planning to find out what they're protecting and why. Look, I've been running since I got to this realm. Running from Draven, from his goons, from every threat that's come my way. This is my chance to take control, to stop reacting and start acting. Her voice softened, but her determination remained fierce. I'm good at this. I've stolen from vaults guarded by dragons, snuck past fey courts brimming with enchantments. This is what I do. Caleb opened his mouth to protest, but Rose interrupted, her smirk widening. She's got a point, you know. If anyone can pull this off, it's her. Argoz turned to Rose, her expression serious. Then I need every detail you can remember about that road, those runes, the wolves' movements, anything you noticed, no matter how small. Rose's dark eyes glinted. Fine. But if we're doing this, we're doing it smart. The group gathered around the table, Caleb reluctantly pulling out a map of the area. Rose and Caleb marked the road, the tree line, and the approximate locations of the runes and cameras. Evelyn joined them, her sharp mind picking apart the magical elements of the security. We'll need a way to disrupt the magical wards without alerting the wolves, Evelyn said, her fingers tracing the map. The cameras are easy enough to handle, but those runes, that's Fey-level work. They'll sense it if we tamper with them. Argoz leaned over the table, studying the map. What if we don't tamper with them? What if we use them? Evelyn frowned. What do you mean? The runes are probably tied to the wolves' patrols, Argoz explained. If we can figure out the pattern, we can use it to move when they're elsewhere. Timing is everything. Rose tilted her head, impressed despite herself. You really do think like a thief. Like a professional, Argoz corrected, her lips quirking in a faint smile. Caleb shook his head, his voice rising. This is insane. Those wolves aren't just guarding a site, they're guarding a secret. Something that no one wants found. Do you really want to be the one who finds it? Argoz's smile faded, replaced by a steely resolve. Yes, because if we don't figure out what's going on, we'll always be at someone else's mercy. Draven, the wolves, whoever's pulling the strings, we need answers. Caleb groaned, rubbing his temples. Fine, but if this goes south, I'm saying I told you so. Rose chuckled softly. Fair enough. But for now, let's focus on not getting eaten. With the details laid out and the team aligned, if reluctantly, Argoz stepped into her element. She worked with Evelyn to refine the magical countermeasures, with Rose to identify the tactical risks, and with Caleb to prepare for contingencies. As they finalized their plan, the tension in the room shifted from fear to determination. Argoz was no longer the runaway. She was the leader, the one who saw opportunity where others saw danger. All right, Argoz said, her sharp eyes scanning the team. We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count. The group was still gathered around the table when Rose leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. Her sharp eyes rested on Argoz, and for the first time since they'd started planning, Rose's smirk softened into something close to approval. All right, Master Thief, Rose said, her voice laced with dry amusement. If you're going to pull this off, tell me. What do you need? Argoz didn't hesitate. Light dampening fabric, enchanted or otherwise. Smoke bombs, preferably ones that can interfere with magical detection. A decent set of lockpicks if we're dealing with any physical barriers. And, she glanced at Evelyn, something to counter the Fey wards, if they react to me. Evelyn nodded, already making a mental list. I can whip up something for the wards. Might take a day or two to get the balance right. Rose raised a brow. Anything else? Snacks, perhaps? A comfortable chair for when you inevitably get caught? Argoz's lips quirked in a faint smirk. If you're offering, I won't say no. Caleb, still leaning against the wall, crossed his arms. This is insane. You're asking for supplies like we're shopping for groceries when what we're doing is practically suicide. Rose rolled her eyes, waving a hand dismissively. Relax, Caleb. It's not like we're storming a castle. Yet. Rose's tone shifted, her smirk fading into something more serious. We wait for the new moon. It's in 3 days. The darkness will work in our favor, and it gives us time to get what we need. Argoz frowned, glancing at the map. 3 days? That's a long time to wait. It's not just about supplies, Rose said, her gaze narrowing. It's about timing. If we rush in now, we're working blind. The new moon gives us cover and time to scout for any surprises. Evelyn nodded in agreement. She's right. Magical wards tied to the moon's phases can behave differently depending on the lunar cycle. If we're lucky, some of the defenses might even weaken slightly during the dark phase. Caleb threw up his hands. Great! Let's just hope the wolves take a 3-day vacation while we're at it. Rose tapped the map, her tone turning brisk. Here's the plan. Evelyn, you're in charge of crafting whatever Argoz needs to deal with the wards. Caleb, see what you can scrounge up from the black market for the rest of her list. I'll take care of the smoke bombs and light-dampening fabric. I know a guy. And what will I be doing? Argoz asked, crossing her arms. Scouting, Rose replied smoothly. You're the one walking into the jaws of the wolves, so you'll need to be ready for anything. Spend these 3 days brushing up on the terrain and studying the patterns Caleb and I noticed. Argoz arched a brow. You sound awfully invested in this for someone who called it insane. Rose's smirk returned, but her eyes gleamed with something sharper. Call it professional curiosity. I want to see if you can actually pull it off. The group dispersed to their tasks, the tension in the air replaced with a focused determination. Rose left the safe house with a casual wave, but the confidence in her stride betrayed her excitement. She thrived on high-stakes plans like this, and the thought of seeing Argoz test her limits intrigued her more than she'd admit. Back at the table, Caleb muttered under his breath as he scribbled notes on the back of a napkin. I can't believe I'm risking my life for this. Evelyn, busy sketching runic patterns, glanced up with a smirk. It's not your life she's risking. It's Argoz's. Comforting, Caleb muttered, glancing at Argoz. You better know what you're doing. Argoz grinned, her sharp teeth flashing. Relax, Caleb, I've got this. Famous last words, Caleb muttered. As the team began their preparations, the weight of the upcoming heist settled over them. 3 days might not seem like much, but for Argoz, it was an eternity. She spent every spare moment studying the map, memorizing the patrol patterns Caleb and Rose had observed, and running through potential scenarios in her head. When the new moon finally arrived, the plan would be set, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, Argoz felt like she was in control, ready to prove that even in a strange world, a master thief could still reign supreme.
Well, you found your way to the end, haven't you? That must mean you're curious, and we love curiosity around here. Before you vanish into the ether, take a moment to subscribe. It's just a click, and trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop for what comes next. And while you're at it, give the video a like. The energy exchange is good for you. Hit that notification bell too. You wouldn't want to miss out on any of our magical misadventures. Who knows what I might conjure up next? Alright, off you go. But remember, I'll know if you didn't subscribe. See you on the other side.